Hello, everyone. Okay, so it is 5 p.m. here in East Coast. So I have started streaming it live on YouTube. So if folks who don't have Zoom, they can still be informed from our Facebook page that we are going live on YouTube, and they can follow along. And let's wait for a couple minutes. And then as we have more folks, then we can get started around like in 5. Is that good? I have a small errand to run, so I'll just be back in 5 minutes.
Maya, I can share the screen though. I talked with Rennie. I can share the screen.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Hi, Lulu Appa. Can you hear?
All right, shall we get started?
Start.
Okay, sorry. Yeah, we'll start now. It looks like we have a pretty small group this week, so we'll go ahead and kind of run through our slides with you, but we'll leave a lot of room for conversation that we can get more of since we have such few people. Bidan, would you be able to share the presentation?
Can you see it?
Yep.
Oh.
All right. Can everyone hear me? Okay. So welcome to this week's talk. Again, this is the Education Committee, and thank you for being here. Can you go on to the next slide? Okay, so just a quick recap. Can you, yeah, there's a couple of bullet points. Go ahead and keep
Okay.
scrolling. Yeah, I just get the whole.
Oh, okay.
Keep going. One more. Thank you.
Oh.
All right. Can you go back?
Oh, sure. Okay.
All right. Okay, so just to recap, in the past week, we've talked about the history of police violence, how this movement really got started. We talked about similarities between caste and race, what is solidarity, how we can become better allies for our Black brothers and sisters. And we talked about the model minority myth, why we came here in the first place, what is the racism we face versus what is racism that Black Americans face. We talked about key terms, what is bias, what is racism and prejudice, how is that intertwined to form systemic and systematic racism. We had a quick movie discussion about the 13th. It's a documentary. If you haven't seen it, highly recommend it. It's about mass incarceration in America and the history of it and what it looks like today. And then we finally talked about race and racism in healthcare for convention. Go ahead to the next slide. And we talked about just the history of Black healthcare in America and current disparities and what we're taught in med schools today and how to improve on that. And we were joined by our amazing panelists. Hopefully you guys attended that and learned something from it because I know I did. Which brings us to, we realized we hadn't been giving out weekly disclaimers regularly, so we want to do this as a weekly thing. And just remind everyone that it's okay to be uncomfortable. It is a difficult discussion, so it's we have to realize that this is an uncomfortable topic, and that's totally fine. It's okay to question our beliefs. It's okay to be introspective. It's okay to question your own prejudice. Nobody is perfect, and we're all working on improving together, improving ourselves and our community. It's okay to question us. If you think we're wrong, please challenge us. We want to know why, and we want to know if we're wrong. We want to be corrected. Do your own research and teach yourself. Please use PC vocabulary. This is an important one because we realize that not everyone has been using politically correct terminology in these talks. And so, okay, we all make mistakes. We will do in the future as well. But it's only appropriate if we're trying to become better to use terms that everyone appreciates and approves of. If you make a mistake, we'll just correct you on the side. Just reminding you that we should use proper terminology. So just before our tech presentation, I do want to talk about ICE and the current regulation because that directly impacts a lot of people in this community. So I don't know if everyone knows this, but immigrant students with F1 and M1 student visas, if you don't have, if you have completely online courses in the upcoming school year, you will not be allowed to stay in this country. ICE will not renew your student visas, and you'll be kicked out. And we don't think this is fair at all. So we unfortunately don't have a lot we can do yet. If you are an international student, or if you know any international students, please email Pratik Dash. I've included his email here, and reach out, and he will let you know and work with you one-on-one to do everything we can to get you to stay here. But then if you can click on this link, if you are a university student, please forward this email, forward this letter around. I've created this letter. All you have to do is put in your name, your major, professor's name, and university, and you can send it out to all your professors. Encourage your friends to send this out, and just implore your professors to include an in-person component to their classes, and that way we can get as many people to stay here as possible. So if you can go back to the presentation. All right, so we'll kick off today's presentation. I know there's not a lot of people on here today, so we can make it really personal. And so if you can go on to the next slide. We'd like to start off with a question. Does technological innovation lead to more or less equality and justice in the US or globally? Can we do like a hand raise thing? Does anyone know how to do that? Like if
Yeah,
raise your hand.
if you click on the bottom, if you click on participants, you'll be shown a list of participants, and at the bottom, if you want to raise your hand, you can click raise hand.
So does anyone want to raise their hands if you think more technology leads to more equality? Raise your hand if you think it leads to less equality. Okay, I don't think we're getting.
I see some hands.
Yeah, that's okay. Yeah, maybe I don't have the right thing up, but just keep that in mind as we're presenting. And now, quick discussion for people who have worked in the tech center or have studied tech-related subjects. Have you guys seen racial discrimination, or have you seen justice to correct it? Anyone?
I see Utko Uncle raising his hands.
Yes, I work with technology industry. So I have not seen any direct discrimination, but there got to be something, because I see very few people from Black race working with us. It's mostly whites or the Indians. So there got to be something systematic issue because of which our industry is either not lucrative or they're not finding a way into us. So I see very, very thin presence of Black race in technology.
Yeah, I mean, even my my company is not a tech company, but we work with, we have our client side and our tech side. And our tech side, everyone is either white or Asian. I have not seen a single Indigenous person or Black American. Anyone else?
Yeah, I didn't study tech in school, but I went to a school where a lot of people study computer science, and one of the introductory computer science classes, there was a professor who had been a white woman who had been comparing different coding languages in one of the first lectures of her class, and she compared one coding language that she didn't like very much to a crackhead, which is, a term that's usually a racialized term that is usually used to derisively refer to, Black people who have interactions with drugs. And there was a really big pushback from Black CS students and their allies. But it was just an example, like that teacher had been using that analogy for years, and it just showed how, if you're in that class, you're not necessarily going to feel safe with that professor if you're a Black student.
Right.
This is Kamal Maya's dad. I work in tech industry as well. And I also have to say that I haven't really seen explicit actions that I would pick up on as objectionable. But as Utkarsh said, I also have not seen a good representation of African Americans or indigenous people. I've seen some Latinx people, but again, very small number.
Sweet. Anyone else? If we can't see your hand raised, feel free to just leave a few seconds to unmute yourself and talk if you'd like to.
Yeah, for me also, just like it's been a year I have started working, but yeah, that's what I also feel like what Utkal uncle has also seen, like the amount of people who are Black who are working in the tech industry are very less. Actually, the number of Asians and whites are pretty much high. Like it may be tech team or like the R&D team of the company when they're especially working in the tech field. So yeah, I see a very less proportion of people. There are, but there are very few. If like the ratio might be like 10 white people to 1 Black people, like that. It should be a 10:1 ratio.
Okay, cool. Thank you everyone for sharing those stories. Those will be, we'll talk about the roots of those things that you all are seeing very clearly in your company. So first I wanted to talk a little bit about the history behind what made California and the Bay Area so ripe for this, for being the center of tech in this country, and also the center of, things like income inequality associated with tech. So during World War II, a huge part of California's economy shifted to like a war industry economy, like creation of weapons, things like that. Areas such as San Francisco, Oakland, and LA in Southern California prospered due to this. And at the same time, there was an increase of Black Americans in California due to what's known as the Great Migration, which was a time during the 20th century when a lot of Black Americans and Black families were moving from the South to different places in the North and West. So that's when we see an increase of Black populations in places like Oakland, LA, San Francisco. After World War II, after a war, the prosperity that comes with the war industry, that usually falls after the war. And in response to that, parts of California that had been benefiting from that war economy wanted to keep getting those contracts from the Department of Defense. And so that's why you can stay on the slide for now. So can you go back, actually? Thanks. So after World War II, California and the Bay Area kept getting contracts from the Department of Defense to focus on research and development of new technologies. And that's what really fueled the Bay Area. So if you look at this graph, you can see, and this took off at that, like this started after World War II, but peaked at the end of the 70s and continued to drive California economy. So if you look on this graph, you can see from 1980 to 2015, the gross value added to the GDP from the tech sector rose quite dramatically. But at the same time, we see that the employment of the tech sector was pretty much stable. So you have this industry that's like supposedly creating a lot of wealth, but there's not a lot of people in that industry isn't creating a lot of new jobs. There's not a lot of new people in that industry that are directly benefited from it. And California now has this new population growth from World War II prosperity, but those people aren't necessarily seeing that translate into new jobs in the tech sector. Okay, you can go to the next slide. At the same time, from World War II to the end of the 1970s onward to 2000, while you're seeing the tech industry grow due to these contracts, you're also seeing this gigantic increase in the California prison population. From 1980 to 2000, the California prison population increased by 5 times, which is ridiculously high numbers. Researchers commonly refer to this as like one of the biggest prison expansions in the world. And yeah, if we think about where we're seeing this industry that's, you know, not creating new jobs, but creating a lot of wealth, and now there are all these unemployed people, what's happening to a lot of them? They're you know, getting criminalized and getting thrown in jail. You can go to the next slide. And one of the, so in addition to increased prison populations, another effect that we see in the Bay Area, which, you know, the Bay Area is a place where we can starkly see the effects of the tech industry, but this happens in other parts of the country that have a big tech industry imprint as well. But in the Bay Area, we can see that from 1999 to 2014, in terms of the need of very low income housing created. So that is, you know, a type of housing that would stave off houselessness because people would be able to afford houses even if they have small incomes. Only a third of that need was met. And so by 2018, you see something like 27,000 unhoused people in the Bay Area. Can you go to the next slide? Yeah, this is just looking at Oakland specifically, which is, Oakland since 2017 to 2019 saw a 47% increase in homelessness. And I don't know if folks saw a recent study that showed that in the US, the San Francisco, Oakland area is the most gentrified area in the US. And that's driven by the tech sector. And we can see this even in the past few years, just the incredible impact this has had on homelessness. Go to the next slide. Thanks. Yes, just another way to think about that is income inequality. The Bay Area, driven by the tech sector, has a huge income inequality where the bottom 10th percentile income is 32,000 and the 90th percentile is 384,000. And you can, that is in the Bay Area, but like I said before, if you look at any area that has a huge tech impact, for example, Seattle or New York, you'll see similar income inequality. And what is this industry profiting off of? Like, what is creating this large value? A lot of things, but those things include large government contracts to benefit off things like mass incarceration, like technology that they use in jails, endless wars, right? We've been in decades of wars abroad that don't really impact us here if we're not in the military, but have been wreaking havoc on other countries. And that those wars need lots of technology, and we're the ones here who develop them. Border patrol and deportation, and police surveillance as well. Tech also benefits from false value inflation, and we see this a lot with startups, where a company will get large valuations based on like future quote unquote value through advertisements or whatever. And so if you have connections to like venture capitalists or the likes, you're able to raise money for your company, and your company can lose money for a long time while you're not actually creating any value for society. Uber, for example, follows that model. But sometimes this fails, like we saw with WeWork, right? But the point is that a lot of companies aren't actually generating any revenue. So even if you want to think about generating revenue as like a function of creating value for society, if a lot of times we see that if you know someone who can help you get an investment, that is a bigger indicator of your success. You can go to the next slide. Yeah, so like some of you had been noticing, we see a very large inequality in terms of who's employed in these different fields. So for example, in terms of all employment, 11% of folks employed are Black, which makes sense because that is proportional to our demographics as a country. But if you go to engineering, that goes all the way down to 5%. You can keep going. Yeah. So these are some visualizations of what are known as like the big 5 tech companies. That'll show you just how stark their inequalities are as well. Like some of you are pointing out, you see a lot of white and Asian folks. White people are 44.2% of Facebook, Asian people are 40%, while Latinx people are only 5.2% and Black people are only 3.4%. And we see less than 1% of Indigenous folks. Keep going. Amazon has incredibly similar numbers, although they do have more Black employees. But I think that this counts, you know, when we talk about what is a tech worker, who are you counting in this? Amazon has a lot more, you know, warehouse employees that they will count in this number as well. Yes, Apple, very similar, although Apple has, Apple is very similar and that looks almost exactly the same as the overall graph that we looked at the beginning. And Google, very similar as well. Yep. So one thing I want us to think about when we're thinking about all these, including ourselves, Asian employees, and we'll touch more on this in future weeks, or maybe people can share examples that they've experienced. But when we saw kind of the increase in quote unquote high skilled immigration from Asia post 1965, and then that kind of compounding in 1990 with the creation of the new H-1B visas and such, the largely, you know, privileged white men who usually were at the forefront of these really prosperous monopoly approaching companies like Bill Gates with Microsoft, were well aware of kind of the things that immigration, precarity, and things like that can get them to leverage over their workers. So for example, if you're here on a work-related visa, if you lose your job, then you also risk being deported, right? If you're not able to find another job quickly enough. And in this quote, we can see that Bill Gates, you know, was well aware of that fact. This is when, in response to people asking him about the very harsh kind of requirements and strenuous testing that Microsoft put many of its engineers and software engineers through while their company was expanding. He said, if they don't have what it takes to work at Microsoft, they can go to Boeing or back east. So he's pretty much conditioning people, immigrants like many of our community, he's like conditioning their existence in this country as based on what benefit they can bring Microsoft. You can keep going. So as the education committee has been researching this presentation, one of the thinkers we've been inspired by is Ruha Benjamin, who writes about, you know, the necessity to think about race studies and Black studies when thinking about technology. And so her kind of, you know, very academic quote is that the new Jim Code is a series of techno-mediated mechanisms that replicate or even aggravate social divisions, inequities, and hierarchies, more or less openly and consciously. Their allure of being scientific, neutral, and objective makes it difficult for civil rights activists and ordinary citizens to challenge their discriminatory designs and hold the individuals and institutions behind them accountable. You can go to the next page. And click one more, I think. Yeah, perfect, thanks. So what Ruha Benjamin is doing here, she's referring back to Jim Crow, right, which were the series of laws post-Reconstruction, post-Civil War that white people used to maintain racial hierarchies, to maintain discrimination, to keep Black people from having the full rights of being a citizen. So she's kind of talking about the way that technology is able to reproduce that same discrimination. And because it has this guise of being scientific or mathematical, the discrimination is kind of hidden. So she talks about how software and algorithms can encode already existing racial discrimination how the tech industry can sometimes intentionally, sometimes not, recreate existing racial hierarchies and even create new ones through hiring policies, and how the guise of technological neutrality allows these systems to flourish. And keep going. So kind of two of the questions that this brings about are like, can code itself be racist? Like, can an algorithm that someone creates for technology be racist? One example of, what we might think of as kind of racial or racist code, a lot of these facial recognition softwares that have been gaining popular attention recently have been shown to be very bad at, like much worse at recognizing faces of color than white faces. And the reason these have been gaining popular attention recently is because a lot of companies that create these softwares, including Amazon, were in the works of signing contracts with police departments across the country to allow them to use this facial recognition software. They've put that on halt for a year, but that's just for 1 year. So in a year they're gonna start reselling these softwares to law enforcement. And there's kind of two questions here. Like, one, yes, it's problematic that this software misidentifies faces of color, because it's going to lead to law enforcement using these to criminalize people of color even more than they already do. And there's this other question of, well, do we even, like, is what we want a completely functional racial recognition software that or facial recognition software that identifies people correctly 100% of the time? Or do we want to eradicate the relationship between tech companies and the software they create and law enforcement? So this is an example of maybe lack of diversity in the coding room led to not only software that is itself racist because it discriminates against people of color, but also maybe the whole concept itself is one that didn't take Black people and mass incarceration into account. Renali, do you want to talk for a little bit about the intersectionality of error you just mentioned in the chat?
Sure, Badan, will you please go back to the previous slide? So I think part of what's also important here is the intersectionality, because the most dramatic difference in error we see is specifically between a lighter male and a darker female. So yes, we see that there are discrepancies between males and females. We see that there's discrepancies between male, lighter and darker, but we also see that there's then this intersection and this interaction effect statistically, where darker females have absolutely deplorable facial recognition rates. And you see a 2/3 chance of being correctly identified by IBM software, for example, compared to 100% lighter male. That's it. Thank you.
Thanks, Renali. Yeah, that's a great point. Yeah, cool. There's lots of examples that we could talk about in terms of tech exacerbating income inequality. These are just a few. One thing to touch on that's super important right now, while we're in the middle of this pandemic and a lot of schools are thinking about what's going to happen in the fall. We're in a position where online learning is incredibly important so that kids can continue their education. But at the same time, we don't have equality in terms of access to the tech that now is necessary to live your life, and even before the pandemic was necessary to live your life. One thing to think about is you're going to have a huge disparity between the educational opportunities between a student who maybe at home has their own laptop and great Wi-Fi, and a student who shares a computer with their whole family, or a student who doesn't have a computer at home at all. The during the pandemic, those students are going to have incredibly different opportunities, and that's going to exacerbate the inequalities between their families that led to those conditions in the first place. And yes, we also see that picture on the right there talking about income inequality. It's really striking that an average tech employee salary, which we saw as most overwhelmingly white and Asian people, is more than the median household income of a Black family, a Black family and a Latinx family. And another thing to think about is this is looking at the average tech employee salary. As we go up the rungs in a tech company, people in leadership are, especially the big five and other really big tech companies, people in leadership, as you go up the ladder, are increasingly white and Asian. And then as you get even further up, increasingly white with a few Asian folks. And so if you separated out that average tech employee salary by race, I'm sure you'd see an even starker difference between the salaries of white and Asian employees. Okay, continue. Thank you. Yeah, so this is something we're going to talk about briefly with just a few examples, but we're hoping that in future weeks we'll talk more about redlining and the history of it in particular. If that's something that you would be interested in us covering more deeply, please feel free to shoot us a message or let us know. But today we're going to talk about a few examples of the intersection between redlining and tech. Yeah, so all three of the examples we're going to talk about are things that Ruha Benjamin either has written about or spoken about. The first one is this company called Diversity Inc., which is a great example how like the veneer of diversity can be used to hide things that are actually fundamentally racist and discriminatory. So Diversity Inc. provides services to companies who aren't allowed to collect racial data or don't collect racial data, but want to create a racial database of their users. So what Diversity Inc. will do is use things like last names and zip codes to give you an idea of if your user base is white or Asian or Black or Indigenous or Latinx. And what's really fascinating is they advertise that they can use this software on systems where companies are prohibited by law from gathering racial data about a particular thing. So even though this company is called Diversity Inc. and maybe is trying to position itself as something that is beneficial for people of color and for Black people, the actual function of what it does is reinforce discrimination by using things like zip code that are markers of difference between race to tell companies what race you most likely are. Something interesting that Ruha Benjamin says about this is it's like the output of redlining becomes the input of the code for this company. So, and we'll talk about this history more in the future, but redlining was the process that white bankers used to decide what sections of the city they were going to keep all white, and then use loans and such to prevent Black people from moving to those sections of the city. So that's why we see such spatial divides between white communities and Asian communities and Black communities and Latinx communities in certain cities. And now this company is profiting off of the fact that because those systems existed, they can use zip code to predict race and then reinforce that. You can keep going. Camden, New Jersey is another example. The city and the healthcare infrastructure in this city, you also use spatial segregation to make health decisions and encode those decisions because they found that the areas that needed more of certain kinds of healthcare and were underserved by hospitals were the areas that were predominantly Black. And so while this is another one of those questions, right? Like perhaps that is a positive thing that came out of the system, where by using the fact that you can use zip code to guess race and then the medical issues that are also divided by race, maybe you could use this to provide better healthcare for different locations. but at the same time, it also reinforces those spatial divisions that are based on race that were created by discrimination. You can go to the next one. Rainey, do you want to talk about this one? Oh,
Yeah. Sorry, Sonia. So this is an example I found when I was listening to one of Ruha Benjamin's talks. In Michigan, they were using this technology, Michigan Integrated Data Automated System, to find people that owed the state money. But from 2013 to 2015, they found that as many as 40,000 people were wrongly accused by this system, and obviously it impacted disproportionately Black people higher than white people. And you know, people lost their homes over this. There were people that committed suicide over this. But yeah, over 40,000 people were wrongly accused. They did sue the state of Michigan, and the Michigan Court of Appeals ruled in favor of the state initially. And I think Michigan Supreme Court overturned that ruling. But as you can, like, just a glitch in the system, or, you know, the system being coded incorrectly led to so many lives being ruined. Move on to the next slide.
Cool. Yeah, thank you for that, Rainey. So we've talked a little bit about, you know, the impact of these companies, and we've mostly so far focused on racial disparities in education leading to that feed into these companies, and the companies themselves leading to things like, you know, code that can be racist or code that can replicate racism and redlining. But we also wanted to talk a little bit about the impact that these extremely large, you know, companies and their campuses have on the communities around them, and how, you know, legislation that is very much buddy with the tech industry can, like, you know, prevent them from having to pay taxes and stuff to go against that harm. So a lot of people might have heard about a couple of years ago when Amazon was doing that huge public thing where they were having cities like basically beg them to create their new Amazon campus in those cities. And in many of those cities, actual residents of the city, especially lower income residents and communities of color, were saying, we actually don't want this because we know that you're gonna, like, because Amazon was having these cities create bids, all of these cities were saying, oh, come here, like, we won't tax you, please come. And a lot of residents were saying, no, they're gonna come gentrify our city, like we've seen them do in the Bay Area and other places for decades. And I think what we kind of hear about less is actually the successes of those activists. So I was talking to some people earlier, and we were talking about how when Amazon was getting these bids for their new campus, there was a lot of media attention. But then in early 2019, when activists in New York actually succeeded in preventing the Amazon campus from coming to New York, there was a lot less media coverage of that. So I just wanted to read this quote from the New York Times article about it. Amazon on Thursday canceled its plans to build an expansive corporate campus in New York City after facing an unexpectedly fierce backlash from lawmakers, progressive activists, and union leaders who contended that a tech giant did not deserve nearly $3 billion in government incentives. But there's still a lot of examples where, unfortunately, the activists are not successful. So you can go on to the next example. Something that you see a lot when you're in the Bay Area, but maybe gets less attention outside, but a lot of communities who have been in the Bay Area and Silicon Valley in particular for generations are very strongly against the expansion of these huge corporate campuses. So for the past few, I don't actually know how many years these plans have been in effect. I think at least 3, potentially more. But Google has been planning a huge corporate expansion into downtown San Jose, which a lot of people see as, you know, the heart of Silicon Valley. And for as long as these plans have been made, there has been a really strong group of different activist groups in San Jose fighting against this. So this picture is from May Day 2019, which is May 1st, 2019. They hung this sign at San Jose City Hall that says "No Google in San Jose." This was put up by Serve the People San Jose, which is one of the groups working on this. You can go to the next slide. And another group that's working on this Google Out of San Jose campaign, which is ongoing. They created these stickers and created a campaign called "Stick It to Google." So they would put these "San Jose Hates Google" stickers all over San Jose. And Google's main campus is in Mountain View, which is north of San Jose, right next to where I live. And a lot of people don't realize the terrible impact that Google's campus being in Mountain View has had on the communities that were already there in Mountain View. Especially Mountain View has large Latinx communities, and they have been overwhelmingly impacted by the gentrification caused by Google and the policing caused by Google and protecting its campus, and things like that. And homelessness in the Bay Area in general, but also like San Jose and Mountain View in particular, like we saw at the beginning of this presentation, homelessness has just been getting completely out of hand, through the roof. There are enough resources in our community to house these people. Like the housing is there, but the wealth is so concentrated in these companies that the inequality is through the roof. You can keep going. Another form of inequality in the tech sector that we also wanted to touch on, since this is something that has come to light really recently, and we've been talking about the relationships between race and caste in past weeks. I'm sure a lot of people have already seen this, but recently California regulators sued Cisco because there was evidence that a Dalit employee was being discriminated against by two of his coworkers, two of his managers, who were upper caste people, and they were discriminating against him for being Dalit. Keep going. So if caste discrimination is something that you yourself have experienced in tech, or if you've witnessed it, maybe you haven't been a part of it yourself, but you've seen other people enacting it. Equality Labs is a really great group in the US, and they have been researching the experience of Dalit folks in the US for years. And so they're collecting stories. So I put the link here, equalitylabs.org/rapid response forum. Please feel free to share your stories with them if you have any to share, so we can really get more research and get more knowledge on the depth of caste-based discrimination in tech. Okay, cool. So I have some action items that the education committee put together. And afterwards, we'd really like to hear, which of those actions sound good to you, or if you have any to add. So obviously, if you work in tech, work towards making your workplace an environment where all feel welcome. Another thing you can do is do a little bit of digging into income inequality at your office in your tech company, between the high paying tech jobs, the even higher paying executive jobs, and the lower paying jobs, like folks who are supporting with food or cleaning in the same office. And you can think about for yourself, and also maybe talk to the company about why this income inequality exists, and do what you can to join forces with your colleagues and demand more income equality within the company itself. Because presumably, all the people working at that office are living in the same area and have similar costs and things. Look at your company's diversity and hiring committees. What are the hiring practices? Like, are they actually pushing for equality and pushing for folks from any background to be able to come to your company, or are they just pushing for like a veneer of diversity so that it doesn't look like a problem? Look for if they're actively recruiting and supporting people who they recruit from historically Black colleges or universities. If diversity initiatives are created by Black folks or Indigenous folks or Latinx folks in the companies, or if it's created by like the white executives and just what they think the solution is. Look for solutions that are really proposed by the people most affected. Also, you can check out the Algorithm Justice League, which is a group that tries to do research and work in intervening in the things we were talking about with quote unquote racist algorithms. Keep going.
Yeah, if you look at the bottom, sorry, can you go back? If you look at the last link, Ruha Benjamin set up like a number of organizations that are actively working to try to reduce racism in the tech industry. So chances are there's something near you. If you go to that website, check it out.
That's awesome. Yeah, definitely check that out and look for one near you. And kind of going hand in hand with that first ask of making sure your company and your team is a place where people feel comfortable. Continue to educate ourselves about the systems of oppression we're complicit in. One, so that we can actually do everything possible to make our own company welcoming. And also because individually we might not feel like we have a lot of power to change a company where we're just a worker, but if we stand together and learn together, we can, push companies together, push the industry together, and actually make a difference. And also, if you're a tech worker and you live in an area with a large tech industry, like the Bay Area or Seattle, or other places like that, see what local groups are organizing against tech-sponsored gentrification or police, or against income inequality, and see what you can do to help, like whether you can donate to them so they can support workers who aren't paid enough, or if there are actions that you can help them out with. You can see what's around you. And yeah, that link that Rainey pointed out to would be a great place to start. In terms of, companies profiting off of things like mass incarceration and wars and policing, the 5 big tech companies that we looked at, their diversity metrics for Google, Amazon, Facebook. I'm gonna forget 2 right now. Google, Amazon, Facebook. Help me out. Apple. And one that I'm gonna forget right now, but I'm sure you'll remember it. Those all profit from those things that we named. And so learn about the company that you're a part of, whether it's one of those big 5 or a smaller one. And if it's profiting off of something that doesn't vibe with you morally, you can talk to your colleagues, you can talk to the people around you and see if this is something that maybe you can push your company to change. There have been lots of examples of workers at especially Google, when Google is doing something that they don't like profiting off of ICE and things like that. Workers have banded together to say, we will not work on this product, or we will, do a sit-in every day until you stop this contract, or you don't renew this contract. These aren't always successful because these companies have a lot of power, but you'll never know unless you try and you make your voice heard. Yeah, continue. Oh, yeah. We can stay on this one for a bit. And if anyone has, I can write them down. If anyone has action items that they would like to add, something that they think that they would like to propose would help in their company or the industry in general, or if you want to highlight some of the ones that we just talked about that you think would be particularly good, feel free to just either raise your hand or unmute yourself.
Do we have anyone that works in those the 5 bigger ones? Anyone that works on Google, Amazon?
So just wanted to spell out the big 5 for our audience: Amazon, Alphabet or Google, as you know, then Facebook, Microsoft is the name. We didn't remember then when we were talking about. And did you say Facebook, Amazon, Apple, Microsoft, and Google? 5. Doesn't look like we have anyone from those 5 right now in the audience.
Or would you want to name, if anyone wants to name an action that, even if it's one that you've already been taking, no matter how simple or small or big it is, what's an action that you have been taking or you want to start taking to address these problems?
So the company I work for, they do, the racial inclusive initiatives, but that's like a monthly conversation, things like that. But as soon as that conversation is over, you get back to your own silo. So you can entirely see that, those discriminations, like you go to cafeteria, you will see all white sitting together, having their chat, and that pretty much continues. And mostly the tech industry, if you see how it is internalized, is that we focus a lot on face-to-face communication because we are knowledge workers, try to get to this. So every conversation, be it work related, flows outside the workspace itself. So you'll continue to have those architectural conversations, the implementation conversation, to your coffee break, to your lunch break, and it goes. So the culture or your background plays a big role who you can connect with. So you'll see pockets of Asian folks, pockets of white folks. And even if there are very limited amount of minorities, they really get almost no breakthrough into those pockets. So it becomes very difficult to have those knowledge exchange. And if you are working in a field of knowledge workers and you are not able to exchange knowledge or be able to partner with them as effectively as you want, so pretty much iteration is just barely when it gets done. So folks move out of the industry. So I have seen in my company, which is not a tech company, but I work on the tech side of it. I see a lot of minorities like Latin folks and African Americans into the retail side of it or the claim side of it, but not a good amount of representation in technology. So my thinking is that if more deliberate consideration can be done, folks should internalize that, because of my culture gap or because of my food preferences, somebody's getting marginalized. I should be including them. I should be inviting them. Maybe this will narrow down.
Wow, that's such a great.
Yeah, so go ahead, Maya.
Oh, I was just gonna say that's such a great point. And Bilan, could you go on to one next slide I just added with what Uncle just was talking about? Oh, maybe it hasn't loaded yet. That's such a great point, and relates to what we were talking about earlier with students not having a professor in their tech major who can guide them. Yeah, that really continues into the industry and can be a huge barrier to folks even if they already made it to the industry. So that's a great point, and I liked your call to action at the end of, since we are a group that, while we might not have access to those like white silos, we have our own silo. And so, if you see folks who don't have that support, whether it's because of racial discrimination or caste-based discrimination, you have the opportunity to end that by trying to welcome them into your fold.
Yeah, I was gonna say maybe at your work you can send out an invitation, just like a talk during lunch, if you're working on a specific project, you can send it out to as many people as you can in your team or in your office, and just invitation, come have lunch with us, come sit with us, and encourage everyone else to do that. That could be a good first step. But just, it's something as simple as eating lunch with different people can, definitely go far.
So I had a quick question about just like from the education level going into tech. I'm personally, I'll be going into business, but obviously like now everything is basically intertwined with tech. But going in, I'll be a freshman in college in the fall, and it's very discouraging to hear how segregated it is already. So are there any kind of concrete actions that are already being taken or can be taken by students to kind of involve everyone and include everyone, because it needs to change, and I think education is one of the core places where it can start. But yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I can speak to that because I was in business school, but in general, I think college, as opposed to K through 12 learning, you're definitely allowed to challenge your professor's views more than you are in high school. So, like, definitely challenge if you think that someone is saying something out of a bias, challenge their bias, email them, go talk to them in their office hours. I feel like in general, professors are a lot more open to that than our teachers in high school were. Yeah, that's step one. There's a lot more communities in college. You will find some group on campus that is working to challenge those educational norms. So join those groups and yeah, build that community.
And that's great. I'm the type of person who'd go and befriend all professors. So I'll jump at the chance if they're doing something wrong, I'll call them out. But another thing I wanted to ask was, I'm going to a pretty racially diverse university, or at least from what I've seen at University of Georgia. There is a significant number of Black people who go there and who are thriving, but also feel that they're underrepresented still. So we're still working, and I've been working on a few things there. But I know there are also a lot of universities that are predominantly white or Asian, and et cetera, which how can we make change there as well as just at these select few universities where there's a possibility?
Yeah, I can speak to that. I went to an incredibly white dominated and Asian dominated university. And I think the first, to echo what Rainey said about joining groups, if I'm sure that there's always going to be at least one group. And if there isn't, find your friends and start one that is committed to breaking through the segregation gaps that other groups might make. You know what I mean? Like, there's going to be a group that's dedicated to breaking that down. And the biggest thing I would say is listen to the calls to action from those underrepresented folks, like if Black and Indigenous and Latinx students, or even Asian American populations that are underrepresented, are putting out calls to actions for ways that you can, like, maybe whether it's sending emails to a bunch of people like what Rainey had posted, whether it's showing up to an action, whether it's withholding gifts, like something that a lot of college students can use for organizing, and saying, we're not going to donate to your university after we graduate if you don't commit to improving diversity in your admissions, things like that. Yeah, really just listen to the activists who come from these communities and see like what has been happening, get a sense of what's been happening at school before, because that way you can be the most effective. And it's really cool that you, as someone who's going to a school with a different background, is also interested in that. There's every so often there's conferences between college students at different universities who are interested in fighting for like racial justice. So yeah, find ways to connect with other students and hear their calls to action.
And also just wanted to point out also that just because like I said, UGA has a pretty strong population, a community of Black people and other races as well, but even then, like, they are still underrepresented. You don't have to have a like major population, like you don't have to have a small population of your community and be underrepresented. It can still be like many people, but they still don't get this, like, the equality that they deserve.
Totally. It's like we were talking about earlier, the veneer of diversity, right? Yeah. Cool. Thanks, Anand.
Also, find the Black professors in your school and take their classes. Support them that way. I don't think I've had a single Black professor in college, which is sad, but yeah, definitely support them that way.
Already on it.
Great.
Hey, can you guys hear us? This is so. A couple of points I wanted to add. So I think the we all need to be better allies. And that's one thing that we can do. We can just be allies. We should have friends who belong to these communities, and we should be, including them. And that's one thing concrete we can do. Regarding companies, tech companies, one thing that I found that is that sort of prevents a good mix of minority employees is this so-called culture fit. We used to have a lot of these sort of part of the interview process. Is this person a good culture fit? But that is really what is a culture fit, right? It's just basically automatically saying that we only want people who are like us, right? In some sort of not very well defined, points. And a lot of companies, and this is really a very veiled sort of, discrimination, right? And a lot of companies, fortunately, are aware of that now and trying to do away with it. But I don't know how well that is working right now. But that's sort of one problem that was sort of causing this inequality or misrepresentation. Coming back to seeing good things that the companies are doing, I'm actually quite proud of the company that I work for. They have from the very beginning have sent kind of messages coming from the top saying how outraged they are. And quite frankly, I was surprised to see the tone of their it is not a very mild reaction, but a very strong reaction, saying that we don't stand for that, and we will do whatever we can to sort of circumvent these sort of restrictions. Yeah, I mean, I was very, very pleasantly surprised. I'm very happy to see that at least in my company.
I would like to add one thing. I think I had raised hand way back. So at that time, but the discussion has swayed away from the point after which I wanted to mention this. I'm not in tech, but I have noticed internships for college internships, which I have noticed very in our community. We see kids getting internships. Or, they know so-and-so uncle, even if you don't get it, you get the internships. So I have noticed, like I have my kids, both Monica and Maya, they have friends who are not Asian. And so they, even if they are in colleges, for them, they don't really get internships. For summer means working to get pay, to save up money for college. And they don't know anyone or where to get internships. So if you are in tech and you are in a position to have interns, make an extra effort to look out for interns from these communities that are underrepresented and who might not have the inroad, somebody knows somebody to get the internship. That would be also helpful, like starting early on instead of waiting till the kids graduate from college and looking for a job.
That's a great point. And I would say that's not only true in the tech industry, that's true everywhere, in all fields, really.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's such a good point. I think I can, think of times when, especially if there's an uncle who has a really high position in a tech company, like, oh yeah, he got someone an internship. And yeah, when you think about communities when that doesn't happen, when you don't have an uncle who can just get someone an internship, that creates another barrier.
Even in business school, that's so stressed to build up a network.
Mm-hmm.
But what is that saying really? Find people to give you a job that maybe you don't deserve.
These are great. Any other actions that people would like to highlight?
I'm not in tech, but I did I just wanted to give a shout out to all of you, the OSA Education Youths. I'm not in tech, but at my work, there was a newsletter that came out. It was all in, they were naive and they didn't realize there was a line that kind of borderline was problematic, and they had not realized that. And I brought it up, and they were like, immediately upper management was like, oh, we are so sorry, we didn't realize, because they usually don't write it, somebody else writes it. And it's the sensitivity. And I give kudos to you guys for educating me and giving me the power to speak up. Thank you.
Thank you for speaking up.
Good job, Mom. Okay, we can move on to the next slide, and we'll share, we'll share that. Maybe take a screenshot of it right now if you want it immediately. Otherwise, we'll share this presentation so you can see them. So, yeah, wait.
Next slide.
So this is, as we can see, we talked about a lot of topics, and there's a lot more to say. And so if we host future discussions on technology and race and inequality, are there particular topics, maybe things we talked about, like if you want us to talk about gentrification more, or if there's a topic we didn't touch on that you want us to include? Yeah, what would you like to see in future weeks?
I mean, I would be interested in sort of, figuring out what can be done to get more African Americans kids to, get into, get opportunities to study technical fields.
Yeah, and maybe extend that to higher education, like in business degrees, stuff like that. We see very less representation.
My thing also would be like how our community, we are we are a very privileged community, and so we don't have, in our community, we don't have financial needs, and we do a lot of charity, but we do a lot of charity back home. My thing would be, how can we also inspire our community to also give back to this, our adopted motherland, and to make a difference here. Like when I see all this talk about how to help the underprivileged there, back there, everybody thinks everybody here in US has some money because we live in a bubble. We see all our friends have enough. We don't realize, like one of you pointed out, like the schools, there are families here who can't afford a laptop, who share a laptop, or like I know of people here, and it's sometimes these families are even white families. I have known this white girl many years back, my older daughter's friend, and she came from a very lower middle class family, and not into tech or anything. Her parents didn't work, and she was a brilliant student, was in mechanical engineering, working full time, and couldn't afford to stay in school because working full time and taking engineering classes was just not possible for her. And I remember at that time I was looking for places where I could find some funding for her. So that's, we could also have like something where our community also kind of gives back and tries to help people here.
And another thing is, I know we've touched upon it in past discussions, but maybe a good thing to bring back is how, like, in the education system itself, we've been kind of like trained to become ignorant to to racism. We learned that it used to exist and it was a thing way back when, but it's a continuous thing that has happened, like that is still happening, and our education system needs to change in some way, or at least we need to be educated from home about the realities of our current society.
Cool. We can broaden it from, you can continue to let us know things you'd like to see in future weeks, but we can broaden it to just questions or discussion points that people wanted to bring up based on their experiences or the presentation. So yeah, feel free to unmute yourself and jump in.
It doesn't have to be now, but Don, can you go to the next slide? No. I think it's on the last slide actually. But if in the future, I mean, if you're like watching something throughout the week and you want us to elaborate on it, anything, just let us know whenever you can. Our emails are in the last slide.
Yeah, please note that down in case you want to reach out to us later this week. Also, I want to note that, I mean, I'm sure we all know many people in our community, whether they're Odia or Indian American or just other folks in your life who are in the tech industry. And so, you know, empower yourself to have these conversations with them to like take what you've learned here. And, you know, folks are, I know it can be really exciting to talk about, you know, the future of technology and like technological innovations that we see around us. And all the things we talked about here should be part of that conversation too. So yeah, I think that these are all really interesting topics that that it's really good to get a variety of perspectives on. So share this knowledge with the people around you too, and don't let this be a conversation that ends here. Like, let's have it be a conversation that just starts here.
And if you want to look into this topic further, we have books and podcasts. You can go to, yep.
And here, we'll send this out later, but just so that everyone who's here right now has it, I'll send the link in the chat. This is the link to view the presentation. So you can see everything that we talked about. You can see all of the action items we've created together and our watch and read more list. Cool. Sweet. If there are no more questions or comments, I think we can close it there. But please feel free to share if you do have a question or comment.
I think Ananya wanted Maya, Mernali, and Dadan to stay on.
Okay. All right, sweet. Thank you everyone for coming. We hope to see you. Yes, we will be meeting next week. I think we're still working out the particular topic for next week. Correct me if I'm wrong, Rainier, Mernali. But we will be meeting next week. Thanks for the reminder. We'll be meeting at the same time, so 5 p.m. Eastern, 2 p.m. Pacific. And we just have a few topics that we're deciding between for next week's, but if you would like to propose a topic that we might do next week or in future weeks, please shoot us an email so we can be sure to be talking about the things that you all are interested in learning about. Cool.
Thanks for joining, everyone.
Okay, thank you all. I will stop the streaming now, and then we can continue our conversation.